Welcome to the Event Modeling and Event Sourcing podcast with your hosts, Adam and Martin. In today's episode, we talk about the new book and dropping aggregates from Event Sourcing Solutions. Welcome to the Event Modeling podcast with your hosts, Adam and Martin. We're going to give this a go for some more topics to be covered by on a weekly basis, on a regular scheduled basis. I think a lot of the topics that we cover in our Discord channel and then private channels are threads and discussions on X and other social platforms. Of course, also what we experience with our clients, both Martin and I, and our teams that we work with. I think it would be a good idea for everyone to do that. So that's the off-the-cuff introduction to this podcast. And if you have topics you want to see, we're going to regularly ask for suggestions. But for the time being, we're just going to look at what's on top of mind for people in event-driven architectures, event sourcing, event modeling, touch on domain-driven design, ports and adapters, hexagonal architectures, all this stuff that is supposed to make you more productive, and see how those discussions can help you. Maybe we can bring up some topics for you to think about, and maybe you can have some advantage in your own work where you get an idea of how to solve something, simplify something, etc. So thank you, Martin. Martin, of course, is located in Germany. I'm in Vancouver in Canada. So what is the city that you live in? I forget the name.
Obing. It's a very, very small town outside of Munich.
Okay. Obing. So we met for the first time, I think, in Munich in 2023.
In person.
In person. Yes, that's right. Of course, online we've known each other. But this was the first time that we met in person. And I was there doing
It was a meetup. It was a meetup.
Yeah, a meetup for talking about event modeling, talking about some controversial stuff as always, which we'll always talk about. I think these topics will come about. So that's our little intro. And of course, I mean, one of the highlights of one of the reasons we're starting this, of course, is a lot of the talk about Martin's book, which finally got released in its final form this Thursday. So right in time for Halloween, October 31st.
Yeah.
And surprise, surprise, a day later, it's the numbered book on LeanPub, and that's a statistic for the whole week. So you only really had a day or two of sales, and you jumped up to number 2 on LeanPub within 2 days for the whole week.
It was pretty surprising, to be honest. I did not expect at all.
I had a feeling. A lot of people have been waiting for a book on event modeling. Of course, people are saying, Adam, why don't you write a book yourself? And one of the problems that I had, obviously, is running a business, which takes so much time away from being able to just do that. The second thing was also that I never felt like I had enough case studies and enough experience to kind of give a lot of core substance to that. So there's good and bad. The people are waiting for a book, it's not there, but you want to have enough time to wait for the experience to kind of give you good content for the book and have some of those things, tested. And so what you're reading is not just theory, you have actual experience of clients going through that. So I think I'm at that stage, and I think I will be putting in just a solo event modeling book too. But now, obviously the biggest awesome thing about your book is that it's combining event sourcing and using event modeling to talk about how those solutions are constructed and designed and planned and executed, which I think is really good. And what really impresses me about the book, and kind of what I would expect from something that I would write or someone in any kind of technical writing, is that you're taking everyone from zero to full implementation by walking them through actually how to do that. So like you say, it's a hands-on book. So no matter what part of the project that you're in, this book is going to have exactly what you need to do. If you're doing event modeling and event sourcing, or want to do event modeling and event sourcing, it allows you to jump in and apply. And so I think you said that in your introduction, is that this is not a book just for reading. You want this in your arm as you're trying to solve your problems and build your systems, right?
Exactly. That was the plan. And I have seen this last week, and I was so happy about it. I was on a call with one customer, and he said he's reading the book and event modeling all along. And I did not tell him how to event model. He made it all on his own, which is absolutely amazing. This was exactly the goal.
It's kind of my goal, because you came out of nowhere. I gave no guidance and just the article. And I'm like, wow, Martin's doing event modeling. I didn't sit down to teach him. He just picked it up and did it.
I was looking for something that could help me finally build better systems. And event modeling was the only thing that really stood out. So there was no
Well, I'm very happy that did that, because then it unlocked all of this that came from you. It seems like whatever it was in event modeling opened up this avenue for you to create such a really good business. You have regular calls, I believe, now on Tuesday mornings for me, I think. Yeah, because I'm in a different time zone. So I think it's a meetup. And is it virtual or in person? It's virtual, right?
I'm not sure what meetup are you referring to?
You were having some online sessions as the book was finalized. You were every week,
Yeah.
I think you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did some meetups. Yeah.
And so that was kind of, I think people were giving you feedback for some of the chapters during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I had
as
a lot
well.
of, I had a lot of reviewers for the book, and they really made the book better. The whole story of the book is I started the book in July, and I didn't plan to write a book. So I asked on LinkedIn, would anybody be interested basically in a book about event modeling? And the feedback was huge. And then
I can tell you that's true. Yes.
I started to write it, and basically I had the plan to write 1,000 words per day.
Wow. It's very
I-
ambitious.
Yeah, I finished the book really in 3 months, which is really something I will never ever do again.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone that I talk to about writing books says that it's a much more effort than anyone has been able to express. So that's good that it's finished, and quite enjoyed reading it. So again, just so that people know, the book is written so that you can follow it no matter what you're doing. Examples are given though in Scala, right? And Kotlin, is that right?
Kotlin.
Yeah. But is there but it's Axon in the back end?
Exactly. So the
Axon.
stack used in the book is basically, it's JVM, which is the Java stack more or less. It's using Spring, Kotlin, and Axon as basically the event sourcing framework.
But if you're not using that, it still works because the concepts are incredibly simple. And I keep saying this, is that, your patterns in event modeling and event sourcing are quite fundamentally the same across that. And these approaches really invite a polyglot acumen to be able to work with different technologies, even together in the same project, even in the same service, kind of like serverless advocates kind of talk about. So, someone that's reading this book and they're in .NET or they're using JavaScript or Python, they should be able to very easily translate the examples, especially today with AI. You just, plunk that in and you're good. You're good to go for, whatever the concept you're trying to get across. It'll carry over to your own language. So, I think it's important for the listeners to understand that there's no language-specific intricacies that are going to stop them from applying this to something else.
No, I think this is really true. I mean, the book is divided into 4 parts, and part 3 is basically pretty implementation heavy, but still the patterns used there you can apply into any language and any project. And in part 4, I have added a pattern catalog, which uses all these patterns, or at least the most important ones, and shows them in detail. And you can really apply this to any language. The patterns are all the same everywhere.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I think this is why you see more. First of all, event modeling is kind of agnostic of what you're going to be doing. I mean, you can apply event modeling without doing event sourcing or anything like that. It's really just about a storyboard of what your system does. And it's a real good blueprint for people to follow along and manage projects and talk about anything in the project. But event sourcing is the actual treatment of information to not lose information. I think that's becoming more of a hot topic these days because you look at, first of all, insights, statistical insights. This is long before AI, where people wanted to have the best data they could analyze to be able to position themselves in a business more accurately for the futures. The more data you keep, the more strength you have as an organization. And I think we see that now in AI, where if you train your models or improve your models or whatever AI strategy you're implementing, it's always good to have gaps in your information. And so why is the shopping cart, why is it only 3 items in there when the person was spending 1 hour on your website? Well, it would be nice to see people adding and removing the history of what actually went into the cart, what someone almost bought, and then they changed their mind. This is really, that kind of information is gold if you're in that space, in that business.
Absolutely. Or even at a bigger scale, think about, why did our sales drop in August? Let's find out.
Yeah. And this is future proofing for features as well, because as long as you might not even know why you need that data, and then all of a sudden 3 months in the future you're like, oh, I wish we had this feature. And the projection into the past with some of that insight allows you to really not have to start that feature with no information and just barely start to scrape it along with event sourcing and keeping this, ledger of what happened as much as you can. And I talk about this more about systems thinking, really about capturing things at the system boundary. You're really putting that mindset of what information is coming in, what's coming out, and being very accurate about that. Because I think we do that in traditional systems, but it's not done to the same extent. I think a lot of that information is passively stored in backups and all that. And we kind of on the surface say that we kind of have that information, so why would we worry about it? But it's really buried. I don't want to have to do a database restore to find out exactly what happened at that one particular moment in the day. It's really far removed from your operational data. And I think event sourcing bubbles up all that good information into your operational data so that all that functionality is at your fingertips should you need it. You don't have to go digging for it. And I think that's a huge obstacle to get going with such paradigms, is removed entirely. And so you can give lip service to that. Yeah, I implemented some history table for some important information. Right. Well, you thought it was important. Maybe some other information was important, which you didn't build a history table for. So anyway, we're getting into the nitty gritty of stuff. Anything else we should add about the book?
I think
that it's on LeanPub. We should say that people should go buy it and read it.
It's on LeanPub. It's basically available since day one. And that was amazing. Someone bought the book on the first day I basically published. There was not a single chapter was written, nothing. And someone bought the book. This basically kept me going. This was really amazing.
Well, I think I know why. There's a big history in this space of people promising books and not having them done, myself included, and others as well. So that's when someone actually does it. I still have some books I bought that were supposed to be out and they're never appeared, but I just wanted to support the person and their idea of how they did things in the community, because even though the book wasn't out, they were active in the community helping people. So I'm like, if the book comes out, great, I'm paying you. It's kind of like asking for Patreon subscriptions and others. I think in our space, Patreon's replaced with other means that are not the same as YouTubers or whoever out there. So anyway, so LeanPub, I think the URL is event modeling and event sourcing. And then I guess if you just go to books, go to the top sales for the week, and it should be at the very height there in the top 5 at this
right
point
now.
For sure.
Place 2.
It's number 2 right now. So hopefully off it goes to number 1 for next week. And so if you haven't got it, get it. It's very easy to read, very easy to digest, and a lot of questions are answered for people, including some of the nitty gritty stuff like eventual consistency. What are some of the highlights that you answer in the book? Maybe we just have one more paragraph about the book.
It's really, I really tried to write the book I desperately needed 5 years ago when I started with all this. This is basically the book I wished I had 5 years ago. And I already got the feedback that many people said, this saves me so much time. Instead of learning this all by try and error, I can just read the book and get basically firsthand experience from someone who already spent all this. And I think this is really basically the highlight. It's really a practical book that you can just read and learn and apply directly.
And so some of those topics I know that looking at old discussions on various forums for event sourcing, CQRS, domain driven design, I know, like, how do you know that the email already exists, the unique stuff, the concurrency problem, right? Optimistic concurrency. How do you actually implement it? What does event sourcing mean for transactional boundaries, right? That's one of the top questions that was always around when people are new to it. So you answer that obviously right away. I know that
all these questions are answered, or most of these questions are hopefully answered, and there are some gems in there. So for example, how do you really do something like unique constraints without relying on a database and stuff like that, which is possible. And
that's it's still in line with that. Is there another one that jumped out for you that you had to answer going back 5 years?
The one question that continuously pops up even today is, how do I use Kafka as my event store? That is something that is also discussed. Short answers, you don't.
That is a very controversial topic in some circles, and a lot of opinions on that for sure.
And then there's a whole chapter about the difference between event streaming and event sourcing, and it's not really the same, not even close. That's one thing that is really important.
So that's really important for people to know, is that it, reading the book does save you from wasting a bit of time. I wouldn't say wasting. I think you'd still learn a lot, but you'd saves your time because this is kind of what I was talking about with event modeling anyway, is that you want to get to practice the goals, even though if you don't understand why some of the concepts are there, because you should still learn them and go through the discussions and all that. But at the same time, you'll want to already be following the best patterns if possible to avoid issues. And I think that's what you're doing in this case for, if someone should use Kafka this way or that way. It's hard. It's tough for a business to spend 6 months, finding out and then start to implement. But we need those features in that system in a month. Why push everything back? So I think the book gives you that ability to move forward without having to spend many, many months discussing, going back and forth, which is you should still do, but you shouldn't hold up your project for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really a time saver. So spending time on learning something isn't wasted time, but sometimes you're just stuck in a problem and you don't know why. Best example, yesterday I had a discussion with someone who spent 5 hours trying to get a test green, and he just didn't realize he had a race condition. He had an eventual consistency problem. And he didn't understand it because he didn't read the chapter. So it's a time saver.
That's great. All right. So I think we're done with the book. Definitely a good idea to get it. We'll have the notes, we'll have a link and all of that. So definitely do that. And of course, as you're listening to this, if you're watching it on your phone or whatever, you will have the images, but we'll do our best to not do visual cues in this podcast, so that if you're listening to it on just audio on your way to work, you should be able to understand everything without having to look at something. And then later on, if there was a topic that you really wanted to dive into when you get to the office, you can look at the show notes and click on the links and get the info there. So we're going to try and appease both types of audience members, ones that are audio only and then ones that are watching as well. So plenty for both. All right, next topic. We got the aggregate is dead. That was a topic that came up quite recently on our Discord channel. The link is in the description for our Discord as well. But so Martin, tell me about that. I just got the surface level of this. I haven't had a chance to watch the presentation, the talk that was posted. But
it's a pretty interesting topic, and as you say, it's pretty controversial. The first time I heard of it, I thought, this is completely nonsense. This will never ever work. But I mean, you have to get used to the idea. The concept is called dynamic consistency boundary. Basically, the idea behind it is basically to not use the aggregate as a grouping concept for the events, but do it dynamically. So basically, you can just request information and events and build your projections basically on the fly without relying on the aggregate. And the first system I'm aware of who is going to implement it is Axonic, and the Axon server. They are currently building the concept into the whole framework. And we had the possibility to try it out in Amsterdam just recently. I was there on a conference and we had the possibility to just experiment. But it's not yet production ready. So I think it will be released sometime in 2025. And I'm really looking forward to learn about it.
Yeah, we had the same talks with our principal architect, Matt Bishop, who is writing Evently, which is a front-end event store. So kind of they are at least being able to access event stores from the front end. If you're writing a front end only application, that you can do these things from JavaScript. But it is one of those concepts that we've also talked about and experimented with, is really, if you're looking at your data as a constant stream of events, you can make these ad hoc locking across whichever properties in whichever events that will act as your transactional boundary for a particular purpose. I usually try to show this example. We started to show some of these examples in deconstructing the aggregate in 2020 during COVID, where during our online meetups, we were kind of seeing, well, what's a concrete example of why this is important? Okay, well, if you look at an aggregate as, let's say, an order, that's the canonical example I think we have in aggregates, is that for those that don't know, an aggregate is a grouping of concepts or entities that are going to be governed by what's called an aggregate root. That's going to be the gatekeeper for any changes to this grouping of things. So an order will have a delivery address. It's going to have perhaps a customer account number. It's going to have order line items. So you can see a bunch of objects already. One of them is a grouping of all the line item. And if you want to change one of these line items, it's not something, this tell, don't ask principle from OO, where you don't want to actually get the instance of the collection and then manipulate it explicitly yourself, kind of doing open heart surgery on this thing. You kind of ask you ask the aggregate root, which would be, let's say, order, and say, hey, I want this order to include this product. And the aggregate takes care of, all the redirecting behind the scenes to do that. And it's also a transactional boundary that, for any operation on this order, you don't get to interact with it until this particular piece is done. Yeah. That's kind of, I don't know if you agree with that interpretation of it, but that's kind of the idea behind an aggregate. And that allows good organization. I mean, that's also diving into traditional OO concepts of being able to have a good abstraction coding to an interface of just, one order instead of having to, look at the implementation details and the how the thing's made, right? You kind of don't want to know. So the idea, though, is that in event sourcing, and the idea of an aggregate is that you would replay all of these events or the whole history of anything that happened to the order, including opening the order, changing the delivery address, and all that. So let's say you want to cancel an order. Do you have to have all the information about that aggregate? You probably don't. You really don't care about what products are there or anything like that. You just want to say that, hey, this order's canceled. Whatever needs to happen can adjust the inventories later. But, canceling the order, I don't need to look at the history of events. And even if you're not doing event sourcing, I don't need to join in all the order line items because they're irrelevant for this operation. So I think at the aggregate is dead conversation goes to, is it okay to kind of know a little bit about the guts of the order? Because especially when you look at it from the event perspective, the events kind of break down this idea that you need to have this information hiding. You're still looking at the history of this and saying that I know I had to add items to the order. So the events kind of force some kind of a information leak, but in a good way because they're stated in a business sense. So they're not really leaking any implementation things. What they're telling you is explicitly what information went into the system and that it actually pertains to an order. So now what that means, I'll make a long story short, is I don't need to really look at a whole bunch of concepts of the order aggregate to be able to perform the command to cancel an order. I can ignore all those. So this is where, this dynamic boundary is what you're talking about, Martin, is where my dynamic boundary for canceling an order doesn't include anything to do with items being added to the order, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
But you said that it was kind of controversial, and I think there was some comments on the video that were disparaging. And what are some of the complaints about it? Is there maybe people spend too much time already convincing their organization to do DDD and aggregates, and now there's yet another change in concepts that they're like, oh, stop, we've got to this part. It was hard enough to get here. Why are you changing concepts even more?
I mean, nobody says you need to stop using aggregates. I mean, for some use cases, it will still, you will still have.
We still do. Yeah.
Yes.
We still do.
It's not that you will never ever use an aggregate. I don't think that is the goal. But for some use cases where you need a little bit more flexibility, this is where the new concept might really work. Because sometimes you just need data from different streams combined. Build a projection. And if you're using aggregates, which is basically the same thing as a stream, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. It's difficult to get this. And if you can build these projections dynamically, that's a good thing. So I think the future will be a combination of both concepts.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I'm trying to think of a really good example that's better than the one I gave of these cross concerns. I give a silly example of an invariant of at a grocery store, and all the cash registers, the tills, most people are doing, they're actually processing orders very quickly. You scan your items on the thing and pay for your order. But let's say there's a risk management requirement that says, in a store, you can't have more than $1,000 of open orders at the same time. So that means each order has to be looked at as a part of a greater calculation to what that is. I think a better example of that is maybe a classroom scheduling application where you have certain things that kind of make a grid of concerns, where you have scheduling, like how many people can fit in a classroom versus how many teachers can give a talk because they can't give two talks at the same time. All these things kind of start, depending on what you're doing to the schedule, you need to incorporate into an index certain properties, but not others for another one.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good example. And the best way of looking at this in an aggregate-less way is that you can look at a stream of all the events, and then the stream looks totally different if you treat, a certain property as the identifier or a key versus if you pick something else. And I think that's really powerful. But you have to kind of understand that, there is some implied locking or consistency issues here. And when you switch from one type of constraint to a different one, so let's say you're wanting to add a course to your agenda as a student versus a teacher wanting to switch a classroom to a different one, or maybe even change the time slot of that, right? So you have to see whether breaking apart the aggregate, what other safety nets are you putting in place to see where these things interplay together. So anyway, it's a very, very good topic, and I think it's a healthy one to understand and play with and experiment with, because it actually gives you some better understanding to why the aggregate does exist in the first place. Is kind of come at it from the other extreme and see, really see the benefits of it from breaking it on purpose.
I mean, one of the most important things you use the aggregate today is typically something like optimistic locking. You lock a certain concept and you ensure that your system stays in a consistent status. But if you break this up, that is one of the big question marks. I think that many people simply don't know how to solve. How do you do something like optimistic locking if you don't have this one ID, this one aggregate ID? And this is the interesting. And I still don't know how this will work out in the future. So I'm very, very curious to see this at scale, in bigger projects at scale. How will this work? I'm not sure. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think, like I said, Matt Bishop, our advisor, has also looked at this. And I think we were talking about this around that COVID time is really, also Chris Condren, the former CTO of Event Store, has done a ton of work on indexing and event streams in event source systems. So he has, very good ideas about, how you do large systems with, even if you're doing aggregates, there's still the question of how do you index the streams to keep things performant, etc. And then more responsible things, of course, is the age of streams. So when you close the books, and how do you introduce an older concept that's now shrunk down to kind of, you haven't touched your order maybe in more than a month, and so it got archived, but you come back to the site and then it has to go back to life. Do you restart each of the events, or do you, because your business has changed enough in that time, do you just use a seed event for a new entity saying our order starts, but we already have these things in the basket? And if we need to dig into the history, we have a link to the previous stream. But for all other functionality that we're doing, we can treat it as if it's a brand new basket that's pre-seeded with certain things. So these are interesting concepts to think about. But all right, that was a good topic. So again, still fresh on the thread in our Discord if you want to join the discussion.
I think this topic will come up next. Will come up again for sure.
Well, yeah, it's a recurring one. And I mean, we were kind of already opened up that discussion, like I said, 4 years ago when we were all forced to be online and talk about things. We ran out of things to talk about. So we started to poke around and
unfortunately, I wasn't part of the community back then. So I joined the whole event modeling space in 2021.
Oh, you just missed it. It was literally the previous year, but I'm sure it was still covered in a few things. But anyway, easy to see the recordings of that. Designing given when then for automation. This is maybe give us the background of that.
What do you think if we skip this topic for the next episode to not get too over time?
Okay, we've gone a little bit. Okay, this is a good cliffhanger. Let's finish this because we want to have this. This podcast is something that's not going to take up most of your day. So Martin has a great idea we went all along. It's the first one. We get a lot of introductions, so maybe that's okay. But the podcast is going to be a little bit shorter so that we can not invade too much of your time, take up too much of your time.
So we are targeting really short episodes where you really get benefits in the short. Yes. Maybe on the commute to work or something.
Yeah, exactly. So let's leave a cliffhanger here. Designing given when then for automation. Maybe give a quick statement of why this is an interesting topic, why people struggle with this, and then we leave it. What's that?
I don't know if people struggle with this, but there was quite a bit of discussion recently in the Discord. How to design the given when thens, how to do it. Do you need read models for it? Do you need a thens for it? There was a lot of discussion, and so I think it's a good point to pick it up and just look at it a little bit.
All right. Well, that's wonderful. So thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Let's continue next week then with pick it up from here and talk about automating or doing given when then testing for where we have automation steps in our workflows, and how can we do that repeatedly, reliably, and without having to always think of different ways to solve the same thing. So
Yeah, and if you have topics that you want us to discuss here in this podcast, just post them in the Discord.
Yeah, exactly. So we might do that in the general channel, or we might just have a podcast questions channel in there. We'll see. We'll let the community see how busy the channels get, and if it deserves its own, then we'll do it. Maybe we'll just flag discussions. And if you have suggestions for other things you want to see in this podcast, not just topics, let us know. And we might do some interviews with people later on when we get some more time. So we're very busy. But yeah, hopefully this has been helpful for you. And again, take a look at the notes, and we'll see you back here in a week. So Thanks for joining us for our first one.
Have a nice week.
Bye, everyone. All right. That was good. So
I like that.